Molly. Just sit back and enjoy this presentation that we have today. I I say presentation, but really it's a speaker, Stacia Bissell. She's a brain injury coach, educator, author, speaker, and survivor, specializing in helping others find personal and professional growth post brain injury. And Stacia serves on the advisory council for the Brain Injury Association of America and is a program leader for Love Your Brain. She has been a keynote speaker for numerous conferences. I heard so much about her and her speaking engagements that she's had for a bunch of the brain injury associations all over this in all different states, and people had just the best things to say about you. And she's also been featured in several podcasts and webinars. And you can also learn a lot more on TB on about her on tbimentor.com, which I'll also post in the chat. So now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Stacia.
All right. Thanks, Molly. That was so nice. Wow.
You're welcome.
Very efficient. I loved it. So, hi, everyone. I wish I could see you all. I know you can see me and hear me, but so I'll just talk to you today for the next while. I actually am. I'm talking to. First of all, thank you, Molly. Thank you, Jen. I saw your note in the chat, and it was great to see you in DC a week ago. So that's very nice to know that you're here as well. So I'm Stacia Bissell, and I'm talking to you today from Western Massachusetts. I'm almost on the New York border, and I'm about 30 miles south of Vermont and 30 miles north of Connecticut, if you know your geography a little bit. It's a really chilly March day here. I woke up and it was in the 20s, so there was a little frost around. Last time I did something like this, my doorbell rang. You never know. We're just going to have to pinch at this, but I'm looking forward to having a very smooth chat with you. So I'm noticing from the chat that there are some survivors and some clinicians, it seems, and direct caregivers. And so I welcome all of you here today, and I hope all of you get something from this talk that I'm going to give you. I am going to be telling my story. I've been invited to tell you my story. So welcome to the story about how things just don't end at brain injury. We keep going. At the end, as Molly mentioned, there will be a Q&A, and I invite you to jot some questions down, but save them for the end. And hopefully you will find something to walk away with that you can think about, talk about with others, do, or change. And I always say if just one of you comes away with something to change in the brain injury world, then progress has been made. So sit back and relax, have your lunch, have your coffee, whatever. I am about to tell you my story, a story that begins with something I don't even remember. I'll take you through what happened, some of the challenges, and then some triumphs. So it was Friday, and it was September 2nd, 2011, and I was biking with really good friend of mine on this beautiful bike trail in Berkshire County in Western Massachusetts. It's called the Ashawiltacook Trail. And I was riding my maroon 12-speed bike and my coordinating maroon and black helmet. And I don't know what happened. We got our signals crossed, and I flipped, I fell, I got flattened. I don't really know because I don't remember a thing. But for weeks, I had this telltale vacant look in my eyes, and I'm sure some of you can relate with that. It was my first week at school where I was the newly appointed assistant principal, and I'd been teaching math in the school for many, many years, and I'd been in the district in various roles for before that for quite a while. It wasn't a horribly bad accident on the surface. I had a broken arm, some ugly cuts on my body, some pretty severe bruising on my face and body as well. And I suffered what was considered a mild to moderate TBI. Um, the TBI was actually missed in the hospital. I did go to the ER, and it was missed. It took a few weeks to be diagnosed by a neurologist, and it was considered a mild to moderate because there was evidence on a CT scan of a brain bleed and some shearing that had gone on, even though it was a few weeks later. They could see the residue and the evidence of that. I did not lose consciousness. I was wearing the helmet, as I mentioned. Otherwise, my doctor, my neurologist told me I wouldn't be here. And if I were here, I wouldn't know it. So it was helpful that I had that helmet on. I'm very grateful, and I'm a big advocate of those right now, or have been since the accident 14 years ago. The moment of contact between my helmet and my pavement is when this person who's sitting in front of you, version two, I call her, began existing. I don't remember my day at work that day, the 10 miles on my bike before the accident occurred. I don't remember the accident. I don't remember the ER at all. I still have no memory of any of that. My first memory was actually waking up in my own bed that night, and I was really confused because all of a sudden I have a cast on my arm. I have no idea where my day went, why I'm in bed, why I have a cast on my arm. And I woke up my husband and I demanded, "Hey, why is there a cast on my arm?" And he told me I'd been bike riding and I fell and I broke my arm. I went to the ER. They put a cast on it and I'm home now. And I'd look down at my arm in complete surprise and I'd say, "Hey, why is there a cast on my arm?" And he would repeat, bike riding, you fell, you broke your arm, you went to the ER, they put a cast on your home. And I'd look down at my arm and I'd say, "Why is there a cast on my arm?" I just simply could not remember his answers when they came out of his mouth. And, I was released from the hospital without mention, as I mentioned, without mention of a concussion or a TBI. Only that my husband should watch me for a few days. And it's kind of surprising that nothing was really pointed in the direction of a concussion because in the hospital I was doing the same thing that I was doing in my bed that night. I had this battery of, I don't know, 10-ish questions that I was repeating over and over and over again. And I've been told that I asked them maybe 3 dozen times right in a row rapidly. And the first three were always, where are the three children? So I'd say, where's Jackie? Where's Levi? Where's Dylan, my three children? And I couldn't remember if they were babies. I couldn't remember if they were older. I didn't know if they were living independently. I didn't know if they were home. I just didn't know where they were. And it was very alarming to me. So those were always my first three questions. And by the way, they were all in their 20s and they were scattered in colleges and post-college apartments and things. So I'd be told those answers. And then my next question would be, well, did school start yet? And as I mentioned, it was the end of the first week of school when I was on my bike ride. It was Friday afternoon, and I'd been celebrating the end of a first successful week back at school in this new job. So I'd say, did school start yet? And I'd be told yes. And I'd remember that my husband had a birthday in early September. So I'd look at him and I was like, "Oh, is it your birthday soon?" And he would nod. And then I would say, "Well, do I have a present for you?" And he would chuckle and shrug and say, "I don't know." And my next question would be, because I would look at my hand and catch sight that I was wearing my good friend Pat's ring on my finger. It was this little gold band, and I'd be really confused by why her ring would be on my hand. And so the next question would be, why am I wearing Pat's ring? Well, I hadn't remembered that she had died 6 months earlier from cancer, and she'd given me that ring before she died. And so there in the ER, I've been told I would be gently told the sad news of her death, and I would cry, and I'd finish my questions, and I'd start over. Where are the three kids? Did school start yet? Is it your birthday soon? Do I have a present for you? Why am I wearing Pat's ring? And cry and cry. 30 or 40 times in a row, I'd be told the news of her passing like it was the first time. So I had some repeat trauma in there. And even today, I have a little bit of a stutter on occasion when I'm tired, and almost always it's a word that has the letter P in it, and I think it's from that. That's my theory anyway. What I do remember in the weeks and the months that followed my accident were things like crying for no reason, being confused by anything more than one thing at hand, and often by that one thing. I was tired all the time. I napped often. People would visit and comment about, at a later date, comment about that visit. and I would have no recollection of that first visit. I used to be an avid reader, but I couldn't read anymore. The letters would just float up off of the screens or the page, and they would rotate around and separate, and that was wild. I developed sleep issues, sleep disorders, and speech issues. Like I said, I suddenly stuttered and still do when I'm tired. I developed an auditory processing disorder, light noise sensitivities, memory issues, unpredictable stamina and cognition. My physical health was compromised. I couldn't feel air temperatures or calibrate time. And most of all of these are still with me today, even though it wasn't a bad or too bloody of an accident on the surface. Doctors tried all kinds of medications to minimize symptoms without much or any success. And oddly, I kept asking people, what happened to me? I actually did not believe that anything had occurred because I couldn't remember the fall. And I was very type A underneath. And so if I couldn't remember, it didn't happen, of course. I mean, I knew something wasn't right. I had a cast on my arm. So I was trying to, in this very odd sense of cognition where I was at the time, I was coming up with my own theories. And what I came up with three possibilities that was going on here. I thought maybe I was in a coma and I was having an out of body experience. I thought I was dead. That was my theory too, is I must be dead. And I was watching this scene unfold from somewhere else. And the third possibility was that people were lying to me about this accident for some odd reason. And I even thought people were pretty clever for thinking to put a sling on my arm and a cast on my arm, which drives home the point that survivors of brain injury don't often have a lot of insight after their brain injury occurs, especially immediately. And for you clinicians and providers out there and caregivers, it's really extremely important to have to be someone and for survivors to have someone or a team around them who can kindly and respectfully remind the survivors, especially newly injured ones, what they need to know, where they need to be, and most of all, that things will be okay. And I didn't really have that, to be honest with you, and I wish I had. The first insight for me that a trauma actually might have occurred was when I went to my orthopedic appointment a couple of weeks later and I saw an x-ray of my arm and I saw the very clean break. So I was like, okay, well, there's some evidence. And I started believing finally that maybe this other thing that they kept telling me about, this TBI thing, which I didn't even know much about, um, might also be present. And even though I didn't remember how I got it or certainly what it would mean to my life down the road, I want to go back to the versions. I mentioned before that the moment of contact between my helmet and the pavement was when version 2 began existing. So I do feel very strongly about the two versions of my life, and the fact that I live with a brain injury, probably like many of you, you feel the same way, that there's version 1 and then there was version 2 at that moment when your brain injuries occurred, whatever the event was that caused it. And so here I am, version 2. The other one, I conceptualize her this way, um, that she's in this tightly sealed glass box. And it's glass because I can still see her and remember her very clearly. And it's like she goes wherever I go. She's like hanging out over here on my shoulder somewhere in this glass box, except I can't access her the way I used to. She just does not cooperate. But I can see her sitting there in that box the way she used to be, in this very confident manner, on a mission to prove herself. She was a workaholic at times, but she was also someone who really valued family time and social time and alone time. I always had a long to-do list, and I was in complete control of getting it all done and then some. And I could also very easily look out and see where I was going personally and professionally. But then in that split second, the helmet meeting the pavement, my TBI occurred. And immediately there was this blurry, confused, emotional, tired stranger. And she comes along and she tries accessing that person and she can't. And no matter how hard I banged on that glass box, I mean, honestly, I'd go and do something as simple as trying to make some pancakes for myself and found I could not do that. And I used to be a fantastic cook, hosting all of my family gatherings over the years, multiple times a year. But I could remember doing those things, those tasks, so I felt like I should be able to do them the same way. And it was so frustrating to find out I couldn't do them. I mean, brain injury is just a really tough road, and it's tough for all involved, caregivers, family members, friends, um, your colleagues. Personally, I had a lot of sadness and hopelessness around this unresolved farewell to this person. She vanished so quickly, and yet the pain of that loss lingered for a really long time. I mean, I lost what I had planned and worked for, what I expected to achieve, and what I had wanted. I was 46 at the time of the accident, 14 years ago. I I remember actually entering my 40s, and I had made my 10-year goals. I told you I was a type A, right? And by the time I was 50, I had planned on having a PhD. I planned on being a principal, running my own school, and I planned to be spending more time with my husband, traveling, doing home improvement projects. And we talked a lot about um, celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. We were young when we got married, and we knew we were going to make it. And we talked a lot about that as we were watching other people, whose marriages were ending. Instead, my life upended, and now there were strike throughs on every one of those goals. I had to redefine my life, and I had to develop a sequel to the story that I had been on track to tell. My sequel isn't done being written. It's not being done edited as needed. And it's important for you other survivors out there to keep growing and writing your sequels while navigating slowly, steadily, and with as much grace as you can the plot twists and the uncertainties and the losses of life after brain injury. And for you others out there to help guide them as they build that life beyond disruption. Please start writing your chapters in your sequels. And when I say write, I do mean you can write them, but mostly I mean living your chapters in your sequels. Each chapter should touch on new ways of handling family life, work life, social life, financial endeavors, purpose, physical and mental health. Because I know better than anyone, it's really tough trading labels so suddenly. Like in my case, my teacher label, my educator label was eventually swapped for unemployed brain injury survivor. My type A, capable personality gave way into this confused, slow, and inefficient way of being. My high energy social self was gone, and she was replaced with this often anxious and fatigued and isolated outsider. I went from feeling healthy to someone who lives in chronic pain on the right side of my body, which is where my impact was, and other unaccounted for medical issues. But I am still a mom and a friend and a sister and a niece and an aunt and a grandmother now. I'm a brain injury coach and mentor, author, advocate, speaker. I bike and I hike and I kayak and I camp. I play pickleball and the piano. I garden. I volunteer. And these are also the things I am, aside from a brain injury survivor, and things I cannot limit myself to either. I need to keep growing and writing more sequels, writing more chapters in my sequel, I should say. Um, I would suggest to you survivors out there, go ahead and make your list later. What things are you that define you? Post it somewhere in your house. What are your other labels? Brain injury survivor does not need to be at the top. I would like you to rewire your brain on this, if not already done. As you know, um, neural pathways are disrupted with brain injury. You go to do familiar tasks once again, like I did with pancakes, aka you're trying to lay down new neural pathways, and it doesn't always go well. It can be very excruciating to attempt, but you need to try. And this is one of the lessons I learned. You need to at least try. Your brain does very well when you try to do new things, even if it's an epic failure at first. Try, try, try. They're not going to lay down those neural pathways exactly the same way. I kind of conceptualize it this way. It's another glass box conceptualization, if you will. It's like you used to drive this fast, shiny car on a paved superhighway. You easily could go from A to B, and now you can't even find the exit to get on that road. So you need to build a buddy system almost parallel to that superhighway just to do ordinary tasks again. It won't feel the same way. It's going to be like you're going down a dirt road now, not a superhighway, but a dirt road, and it's bumpy. And you're driving not a shiny sports car, you're driving an old rusty slow truck. And when you arrive, you probably are going to be really tired and need a nap. But it's what I did and what I had to do simple things again, like make pancakes. I had to try. I needed to bump along and I needed to nap when I was done. And most of all, I needed to show myself grace when that truck wasn't fast or efficient. It is such an odd feeling to suddenly be so different without a choice in your functioning power and your physical ability and your personality. Sometimes your strengths are gone, your worst traits become worse. What you do and say might be new and unrecognizable to many others. Maybe you don't move the same way. You're going to be angry, you're going to be scared, disappointed, frustrated, making the recovery harder. It's just so challenging to be this new person when cognitive and emotional pieces of you are unrecognizable. But then you look in the mirror and you're confused by the recognizable. The person looking back at you often looks exactly the same. You can't always see the invisible nature of this injury, but neither can others. And that's really important for everybody to remember. Let me shift back to my accident a little bit. Um, at the time of my accident, as I mentioned, I had just taken this new job on in my school as like an assistant principal, academic dean type of thing. And I had earned an undergraduate degree in mathematics and a graduate degree in education. I mean, this was clearly my path to be a math teacher and eventually an administrator. I was ambitious, passionate, knowledgeable in this field. I had just become a licensed middle and high school principal earlier in the year of my accident. This was my craft. This was my future, my interest, my income, and I was good at it. I saw myself retiring with pride and a party at age 65 and then continuing, consulting for other schools or the State Department of Education. That entire chapter and vision died because of my TBI. And I didn't go down without a fight, good or bad. Maybe bad. My neurologist kept me out of work for about 8 months before she allowed me to go back as a trial for 3 hours a day. And that was only because I pushed her hard to let me go back. So I went back in May of that school year. The accident was in September. I got to go back in May. School was almost out. So it was just really a small trial. And I realize now that was an exercise in getting me there on time, dressed appropriately. It was not about being productive once I got there. I was very drained by the time I got there at 7:30 a.m. from doing just that, being there on time, pushing myself to get there on time, dressed appropriately. And at the end of my 3-hour shift at 10:30 in the morning, when I was allowed to go home, sometimes I had to sit in my car in the parking lot for a while just to find the energy to drive home. And I only lived 2 miles from the school. During my 8 months off, if you will, before I went back to school, I had a lot of testing and therapy appointments. I counted them once. I had about 80 appointments in all neurology, orthopedic, chiropractic, primary care, neuropsychology testing, psychiatry, physical therapy, physiatry, talk therapy, EMDR, cranial sacral therapy. And then over the years, I would add osteopath appointments, vestibular therapy, vision therapy, acupuncture, massage therapy, pain clinics, Botox injections for migraines, steroid injections for pain, functional medicine, and nutritionist. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some. And all of those specialists were because of this not so bloody mild TBI. Most importantly, among all of those therapies was my cognitive rehab appointments with an incredible speech and language pathologist named Katya Bowen. And I owe her so much. She taught me many things again, just so I could function. But mostly she believed in me. So hats off to any SLPs out there today. It was Katya who told me that maybe someday I would educate in a different way. And she was right. It was also Katya who told me after I demanded to know when I'd get better at least 1,000 times, and she didn't know what else to say. She finally said, Stacia, you're going to recover anywhere from 1 to 100% between today and the day you die. So obviously she didn't know, and she was right again. But back to my appointments. They were my new social life because my friends were thinning. Between my friends and my family members, both on my side of the family and my husband's side of the family, oh my goodness, I was asked if I was faking it. I was nicknamed SPED, which is an acronym for special education. I was mocked openly the first time I went out in public. My first night out, we went to a very quiet little jazz bar. One of my family members came out and mocked me openly. I couldn't read the menu. I don't know, former colleague and friend of mine who taught special education in the schools told me if I just get up and do more, I'd get all better. And while cocooning is not the answer, neither was her understanding of this situation. Sarcastic or not, with all of these people, I don't know, but these comments really, really touched a nerve with me. And I've certainly learned that when people go through something like this and your circle may decrease in size, don't worry about it because sometimes that can actually increase the value of the circle that's left by working through the weeds. So I share this to make a point. It may be hard for people in your circle to see and understand exactly what is happening to you after brain injury, that maybe you have less stamina, maybe your foundation, your emotional foundation isn't as steady, but your goodness and your intellect, they're still there. It's your processes for doing things that has changed. Others have to resist this temptation to minimize a survivor's symptoms and remember that resilience will grow from any support that you can offer a survivor. I want to tell you a quick story about one day in cognitive rehab with Katya. Um, you know, first of all, I have to say I had a lot of work to do. I went to probably 30 or 40 appointments with her. I had a lot of work to do in and out of those sessions. I mean, I needed to adapt and get comfortable with these new brain injury shoes, metaphorically speaking, that were on my feet now that rubbed me the wrong way and pinched my toes. Because the quantity of post-concussion symptoms and disorders, it hasn't changed in 14 years, but the quality has because of those strategies that Katya taught me to try things, to build that buddy system. Um, One day she said, if I would stop fighting this injury and start accepting it and begin working hard at managing the symptoms, I might recover more. And I was scared and hopeful enough to listen to her. And another thing that happened in cognitive rehab with her that really was insightful along those lines, she'd given me this task, which I failed miserably at. She just gave me a deck of cards and said, "Hey, just pull up one heart, one diamond, one spade, one club, and put them on the desk in front of you and face up and memorize, where they are in line." And look down. I was like, "Okay, got it. Hearts, diamonds, spades, clubs, got it." Turn them over. She asked me to turn them over face down. And with the rest of the deck of cards, she just said, "Take one at a time, look at it, put it face down in the pile that matches its suit." Pretty simple task. The obvious goal was that you'd have all 13 hearts in one pile and all 13 diamonds in the next and so forth. And I was very confident that that would be the case. But when I turned them over, that is not what happened. And even though it took me an enormous amount of time and concentration to put those cards in those piles, when I turned them over, they were all scrambled up. And it was the most insightful and pivotal of moments. I mean, the results were in, and they didn't lie. It was really uncomfortable for me. And it gave me this insight into what the inside of my brain must look like, that I couldn't remember the order of four suits of cards. And I went home that day and looked in the mirror and I was like, okay, Stacia, what are you going to do about this? Because of Katya and that particular task that day, I put myself on a mission. And three things, it seems like it's always three things with me, to educate myself about brain injury in general, to learn as much as I could about brain injury, and to become as insightful as I could about the specifics of my brain injury. What post-concussion symptoms did I have? And the third one was I put myself on a mission that day to become a voice for brain injury, to educate where I know other survivors cannot do sometimes. So I just want to get into a few personal things that happened, and then I'll swing back into building up. My high school sweetheart, father of my children, husband of 30 years, took on more on top of his demanding job. And I'll be very vulnerable with you at this time and say that when the accident occurred, we were in this phase of a little disconnect. It happens sometimes. And we had planned to address it as soon as our son went back to college in September. And then that accident occurred in early September. So that didn't happen. And being in that phase of disconnect at the time of the accident did not serve us well. I would say, especially me. He told me a few weeks after the accident that he was going to be moving out. Excuse me. Once he learned the extent of my injury, he stuck it out another year. But my entire acute recovery period was spent waiting for that other shoe to drop. And that had really negative and residual effects that can't ever be measured or made up for. And sadly, a year later, when my feet were not on earth yet, again, and I was trying to go back to work, he moved out of our home against my ultimate wishes. And we separated and eventually divorced. And statistics show that this is a very common relationship story post brain injury, really sadly. Thankfully, my three children really grounded me, and today there are three spouses as well, and my three grandchildren. And as I mentioned, they were all in their 20s at my kids were at the time of the accident. They all handled my injury very differently. It's evolved to say the least. But one gift I'll never forget was when my oldest son said pretty early on, Mom, you have been such a driving force behind our family for so long. If you have to take this time to focus on your recovery, that's okay. The three of us are in an age that we need to learn to stand on our own 2 feet more anyway. And I remember the relief of hearing that, because racing around trying to act like the mom I had been, a single mom now, was coming at a really high cost to me. I mentioned I went back to work 3 hours a day after about 8 months. I rested over that summer. I went back full time in the fall, a good 12 months after my accident. I had accommodations that my neurologist wrote up, and that my principal still accommodated me with beautifully, and yet I still struggled. Um, but it was okay. I felt confident going back to work because I had four good elements around me. My husband was still living with me at the time. He had not moved out yet. I didn't know when he was leaving. Like I said, it was always waiting for that other shoe to drop, but I felt confident. I was hoping he would stay. I had a good boss. I had good providers around me. But about a month after I went back to school, my husband moved out, coming home from the grocery store one day to find his closet empty. He had been looking for an apartment for the entire year instead of considering how he might be able to stay. My insurance, I found out, would not cover additional cognitive rehab with my providers, especially Katya, that had capped out. So I still had a good boss, a good neurologist. My neurologist could tell I was struggling, tired, unhealthy, poor quality of life. And at the end of that first year back, she said, "You're not going to go back to this career. You just can't." But I begged her because I had lost so much of what was familiar to me. She could tell that my job was keeping my feet on the ground, if you will. So she cut me this deal and she said, "Okay, if you agree to rest over the summer, I'll let you go back in September again. But if I don't like what I see at my first appointment with you in October, I'm going to pull you from your job and you're going to go quietly." So I agreed to that. And then in August, right before school started, she closed her practice and she moved to Pennsylvania. And I didn't have a doctor who understood brain injury when school started. And she was absolutely right. By October, I was in such bad shape with the accumulated effect of everything over the last 2 years. I don't know how I made it to the end of that year. It was very tough. I had no time or energy to be social. I was quite isolated. Everything I had extra for time after my naps and work was spent, cleaning and doing grocery work, grocery shopping and cooking and yard work and bills, things that had been handled by somebody else. I don't know, but I made it to the end of that year. And because I was a glutton for punishment, I decided to rest over the summer and try it again the next year. And then my principal retired that summer, and a new principal took over, and she took those accommodations I learned to depend on, and she created the exact opposite. I, um, I can't even, that's a whole book in and of itself. But in addition to maintaining the job that I had been struggling in as assistant principal, she threw at me, "I'm going to need you to teach two math classes a day now in two different grades. I need you to take on the role of math department head and cover the in-house suspension room one period every day." So after only 3 weeks, I got creative and I combined my classes with another teacher, which helped reduce the stress on both of us. It's a great model to co-teach. But then I received my first ever letter of reprimand in my entire career from the new principal that said that I had failed and or refused to comply with my work schedule and that my conduct could have jeopardized the well-being of my students and negatively impacted other staff members. And it stated an investigation would follow. And the other teacher, she did not receive a letter. I was really shocked and angry, and I felt so ashamed, and I felt really targeted because of my brain injury. I'd always had stellar performance reviews, even the 2 years prior with my TBI. Thankfully, though, by then I finally had a new and smart, intuitive doctor who pulled me that day of receiving that letter, and I have never been back to that school. Overnight, I lost my career, and what followed was a very, very low and dark point of my life that I had to climb out of. And I was forced to acknowledge that I lost that final connection to that woman in that glass box. Boy, I hadn't realized how tightly I was hanging on to that piece of her, and how I really didn't want to be a different person. I was so trying to be the same person I had always been. I didn't want to be different. And this person who was wearing this really uncomfortable pair of brain injury shoes, but they were the only pair of shoes in my closet now. And they weren't solid hiking boots or anything to climb out of this situation. They were more like high heels, and I had a big climb ahead of me. And so what followed when I finally was home again, was the start of navigating disability retirement systems and years of difficult moments engaging in our insurance and legal systems. And this is a common story also, and a sad one and a wrong one for survivors. And I'm really thankful for organizations like the Brain Injury Association of North Carolina and in my state in Massachusetts, and maybe some of the organizations that you represent out here today, because you help folks like me navigate things like this. It's also why it's so imperative for people in general, whether you're a survivor or not, caregiver, provider, to get involved in organizations that support brain injury, to educate and advocate, donate, participate, volunteer, write and speak your stories so that the world becomes less ignorant and more informed about this silent epidemic. Because eventually, brain injury will exist in your circle for about out of every two of us, somewhere in your circle. The end of my beloved career was when I stepped foot into the Brain Injury Association of Massachusetts. I attended my first support group. That was a game changer. And after leaving my job, I saw a decline in my headaches. I started to exercise more, volunteering, writing my story, speaking my story. I co-founded a brain injury support group in a neighboring town. I wrote a handful of articles that have been published. And 2 years ago, I wrote my condensed version that you're getting somewhat of today of my brain injury story. And I titled it Breaking the Glass Box. And it was published in the Amazon bestselling anthology called Deserts to Mountaintops, Choosing Our Healing Through Radical Self-Acceptance. It was an important project with other women authors who went through something, they learned something, and decided to heal out loud so others don't have to suffer in silence. It was quite a project, and I welcome you to check it out on Amazon. If you get the Audible version, it is actually my voice. You'll hear me reading my story. Many years ago, I started TBI Mentor as a brain injury coach, helping others make sense of their brain injuries, their journeys after brain injury. I'm 1 week away from launching a virtual young adult support group for brain injury survivors who are in their 20s and 30s. I serve on the advisory council to the Brain Injury Association of America, and I'm a program leader for Love Your Brain. Just because I've done all that and do all that, don't get me wrong, I still have my days, and I have to work hard to help myself through them, to remember the self-care that I've learned to cultivate over the years. Suffering well is not a good answer. With time and the right people around me, I have learned that I can make and sustain meaningful relationships with quality people who are doing the hard work in their lives too. I've learned that participating in new experiences builds a stronger brain. Yes, I've gotten on my bike again. I always get on it on the TBI anniversary date on the same trail to conquer that. I've learned to say yes to new things like zip lining and public speaking. I've finally learned how to say no, and I've learned to say no way to an expiration date on my recovery. I realize that I've been given the gift of slowing down. I have more time to think, reflect, and spend time with friends and family. I'm more positive, patient, accepting. I've learned I'm strong and resilient. I bet you are too. I've developed more compassion and empathy. I've learned to be empowered by my disability. At one talk a few years back, someone in the audience said, "Well, then, are you glad this happened to you?" No, no, I'm not here as an advertisement for brain injury. Just bang your head and you can have it all too. No way. But seriously, there are some great gifts that have come about since my TBI. And a lot of it has to do with the people right in front of me today, like you, the survivors, the heroes, the survivors, the caregivers. My goodness, they're heroes. Clinicians who help us, other providers, and organizations like this one. I've learned to be grateful and hopeful, and I'm even grateful for people I don't know anymore because who knows? Maybe their misunderstanding of brain injury will clear up someday. My message to you out there today, just know it's okay to flop at times until you make it, but try Try new things. The first 5 years are the toughest. Work at understanding your brain injury. What post-concussion symptoms do you have? Strive for balance in your life. Quiet your mind. Move your body however you can. Surround yourself with quality people, fresh air, good food. Find acceptance of this tough thing. It's a miraculous cure. And if acceptance seems too tough or high of a bar, then acknowledge it. Acknowledge your brain injury and then manage it well. Take good care of those brain injury shoes. They're going to be the ones you wear for a long time. This thing is going to be invisible to others, but not to you. It will be what you make it to be. For the providers and caregivers and loved ones out there, the same list goes for you. And your job is to also allow some kind and respectful and guided floundering to take place with the survivors you care for, because it may lead to more insight, awareness, and progress. And remember, I've said this earlier, that their resilience will grow from your support. I've learned to keep writing my sequel in ways that work for me. I've learned to make peace with uncertainty. I've had to meet myself where I am and care for that person so fiercely. I'll end just by saying I do realize my brain is still injured and I'll always have to manage it wisely. But there is nothing wrong with my heart. So thank you for listening to my story. I hope there's some questions out there that I might be able to answer. Molly, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh my goodness. That was lovely. Thank you so very much for sharing your story. How powerful. I mean, everyone, oh, we're getting a lot of thank you. Thank you so much for sharing
Oh,
the gift of
you're
slowing
welcome.
down. This is
Yeah,
so true. Thank you.
you're
Oh,
welcome.
lots of hearts. We
Oh,
do
thanks,
have
everybody.
one question from Marcia Gibson.
Okay.
It sounds like employment was a driving force in your recovery. Did you notice that your treatment team was supportive of your desire to remain employed or more discouraging of you continuing to work? And as you think about working while recovering, is there any support that you feel would have been helpful to allow you to work while you were recovering?
Those are great. Oh my God, I love that. So Molly, because I've already lost all of there were 3 or 4 questions. Can you start with the first question there? There were three
Oh,
or
I don't have. Oh, where?
what? So sorry, in that one question from
Oh, in that one.
there were,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
all right,
Okay,
same
so the
page.
first
Yes.
question was, were my
Yes.
providers encouraging or discouraging, right?
Yes.
That
Yes.
the
That's the
first one?
first one.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
So yeah. So in all honesty, they were sending me messages from the get-go that maybe I needed a new career someday, and that they would have been very happy to probably pull me before I ever went back, to make it official that I was on disability. It was me pushing them. So when they saw my tenacity about that, I was basically saying, "Oh, you guys don't know me." And so they were right in the end, but I think I needed to prove it to myself. And so when they figured that out, what my neurologist did, she actually sent Katya, my SLP, to my school to look at the environment so that that the Katya could inform the neurologist what accommodations I might need. She met with my boss. So that was an incredible service to me. And my accommodations were there very customized, and they were what got me through those next 2 years barely. And so when they disappeared, when that new principal came in, that's when I everything fell apart, because those accommodations were taken away from me, and then added were these other things. And I know there was a second part of that question.
Yes. As you think about working while recovering, is there any support that you feel would have been helpful to allow you to work while you were recovering?
Mm-hmm. The accommodations were important, and I think it was that site visit to make the right accommodations. I think part-time was good. I think being able to see my speech and language pathologist, who was my cognitive rehab therapist, to get continued strategies for dealing with some of the challenges of everyday working would have been really good to have someone checking on me to make sure they were working, maybe even coming to do a site visit and seeing me in my element, making suggestions, anything that can be provided like that. And I know that's a very rare thing, but if it can, you can ask. But I think cognitive rehab, honestly, because they're the ones who are going to give you your strategies for dealing with, you could bring to them, my desk is always piled. I don't even know where to settle my eyes, or my stamina is so low, and then they can address that. Well, how about, a frequent break, 5 minutes every hour, go into a corner or a stairwell, or look out the window, or have a cup of tea, or, just bring them your issues, and they're good strategizers, you know.
Wow, yeah, that is so great that your SLP went to your work and saw. And I think that's really important to note too, that you know every like job that you have could look the same on paper, but it's actually being in the environment and seeing what you're going through on a daily basis, like to see what adapts, like accommodations that you would need.
Mhm.
So,
She told the story. She's told this story before. That when she walked in there, she told me this years later. She looked around my office and she said, excuse my language, oh my gosh, she is screwed." She's like,
oh,
"This is not going to work." And so, the bells were going off, the school bells, and the radiators and the clocks were ticking, and there were things all over my office. I had three monitors and a phone, and she's like, "I have some work to do here," to help her. So, we turned the fluorescent bulbs off, and the speakers off, and things like that, and started to put things in folders, in stacks, instead of all around me. And it was really helpful.
that's so great. There is another question. Do you have any hints for that really struggle with an for people that really struggle with initiative?
Yeah, I do. I think that what you need to do is ask yourself this question: what does finished look like? Okay. A lot of times when you're a survivor, especially newly injured, you you go, you're very motivated to do things. It's not a lack of motivation. Don't let anyone say it's not your motivation, or you're not motivated. You have the motivation to do a task, and you don't initiate. Sometimes it's, because your executive functioning has been injured. So you have to think about, well, what does finished look like? Because we can't see all the steps, right? So that first step is going to be almost impossible because we don't even know what finished looks like. So ask yourself, what does finished look like? Katya did that with me. I tell her, my kitchen's a mess. I don't know how to clean it. She says, "Well, what does clean look like to you?" And I said, "Well, the dishes are done." She goes, "Okay, the dishes are done. Are they in the sink?" And I like, "No." And she said, "Well, where are they?" I was like, "They're actually dried and put away." "Oh, well, what else does clean look like to you?" I say, "Well, the counters are wiped down, and the sink is wiped clean, and the floor is swept." And when I finally started to realize what finished looked like, I then could initiate those tasks. I could get the broom and the sponge and the this and the dish towel, and I knew what I was going for. I knew what finished looked like, not just what I was going for, but what finished looked like. And if you need to write all that down, do so in steps and what materials you need. So does that help? I hope that helps.
That helps me. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
good.
thank you. Yeah. So I'm sure it will resonate with our audience. I
Good.
mean, that's such a great thing. But yeah, knowing what the goal is, knowing what the finish looks like, and visualizing that,
Mhm.
um, yeah, allows the steps to become clearer.
Okay.
So great. We do have Annette said very similar return to work experience.
Mm.
Went back part-time to 15-year career as an assistant VP in accounting,
Oh,
returned to be stripped of all duties. They let me go because I did not return full-time. I was crushed to lose that. Daughter reminded me rejection is God's protection. I am now seeing the truth of that. Oh, thanks for
Oh,
sharing it.
wow. Thank you, Annette. I'm sorry for what you went through. It had to have been really hard to experience that complete stripped of duties and then eventual let go. That's awful. But I love your spin on it. And I stay with that and keep writing the chapters in your sequel, okay?
Oh, well, time is gone by so quickly. And it is 1 o'clock. So thank you, Stacia, so much for sharing your story and taking the time to be with us today. And thank you everyone that joined. Just as a reminder, I put her website, TBI Mentor, in the chat. But if you have any questions or follow up, please feel free to contact me. And yes, thank you so much, Stacia.
You're so welcome. Thank you, everyone. I don't know how many of you are out there, but thanks to each and every one of you for being here today.